Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing well. You, your family, your team, everyone around you. Today, I want to talk about the importance of creating space. I've been thinking a lot about spaciousness over the last several months. It's kind of something that's been on my mind since the beginning of the year, and really this desire for myself to have more spaciousness in my life, in my physical space, in my calendar, in my, relationships with people. And I've had a couple of experiences over the last month or two that have really underscored this. I was sharing, I think, a few episodes ago about how I went and did a retreat about a month and a half ago, and it was really powerful, a lot of emotional release and just getting in touch with some deep pain and grief, but also some real love, and it was beautiful. And I just felt like after that retreat, I felt just an enormous amount of emotional spaciousness. You know, kind of like how you feel after a good cry. It was like that, but it lasted longer than just simply, um, you know, having a cry and then feeling good in the moment afterwards. And so I've been thinking more about that. And something else that I noticed at the beginning of the year, over that week between Christmas and New Year's that I love, I just found myself really compelled to want to clutter clear in my office in particular. And I moved the furniture around and I went through my closet and got rid of a bunch of stuff. I mean, I do this. I've recorded a few episodes in the past and have done this. You know, many of us do this, right? Whether it's springtime or whether it's New Year's time or whenever random times just to like clear space out. Um, and the physical spaciousness has been a really interesting. Like there's just all this space here in my office, which I'm really loving. But I noticed there's this not even conscious desire or just inclination to kind of want to fill the space. And additionally, I've been going through, I have a storage unit which has a whole bunch of stuff from, my childhood and growing up, as well as things of my father's and my mother's and my sister's. And I've actually found myself going through some of that and releasing some of it and reorganizing some of it. And I've just sort of felt compelled. And it's got me thinking more about, with the pace and the intensity of life and work these days, just the importance of us being able to create space, physical space, if we're so fortunate, space in our calendars, if we can, um, creating space with other people. One of the things I notice when I'm working with teams, I was just with an executive leadership team, one of our clients last week in Atlanta, and we were talking a bit about, they're so busy, as we all are, but that when they get together and they're spread out all over the world, that there's not a lot of spaciousness. There's not a lot of white space in the meeting agenda, even in the calendar, for them to just have sort of unstructured discussions. And it's hard to do that because people are going here and there and everywhere. And, it's not just about them and their team. This is true for a lot of busy leadership teams that I work with. This is true in my own life, in my own calendar. And so if we take a look at why is it hard for us to create space? We're conditioned to stay busy. Productivity is seen as so important, especially in our, American Western culture, responsiveness, constant engagement. We're often rewarded for that, working all the time, being able to respond instantaneously to texts and Slack messages and emails and comments and posts and so that's the reality of life, right? And we often confuse full with meaningful. Like if I have a full packed calendar, if I have, a lot in my space. Well, often I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this, and I was sharing with him about creating space in my office and going through stuff. And he's like, we usually just fill up the space that we have, however much or however little it is, right? You talk to people who live in very small, quarters, an apartment in New York City or wherever, and it's like they're able to manage in that small space. And then if you've ever had the experience of moving offices or houses to a much bigger space, at first you think, well, what am I going to do with all of this space? I'm going to be banging around in here. And very quickly, we have a way of filling it up with furniture and books and all kinds of things, right? And again, maybe you're someone who knows, oh, I manage and deal with a lot of clutter. Maybe you're someone who keeps your space, relatively clutter free. But there does seem to be this sense that we think more is better. and we're often sort of bragging about our busyness and our schedules and our travel and the things that we have going. And it's not that there's anything wrong with having a lot going on. I tend to have a lot going on all the time, which I mostly enjoy, but I do think it's easy to get caught up in just the sort of rat race nature of that. There's also, we often have, a bit of discomfort with stillness. One of the things I've been saying to Michelle the last couple of months with this physical space in my office is like, I feel like it's important to keep the space clear as much as I can because I'm sort of asking the question, like, what's wanting to emerge or what's coming next. I don't want to just immediately fill it up. This week, I've actually had a lot of spaciousness in my calendar, and I've noticed I'm really enjoying it, but it's also kind of uncomfortable. And I've actually been weirdly, in some ways, less productive because I'm not going from one thing to the next, but I'm also like, oh wow, I feel like I can breathe and I can think differently and more deeply and about some stuff in a more unstructured way because I'm not just going from one Zoom meeting to the next, to the next, to the next event, to the next thing, right? And so there's often a discomfort with stillness. We create space, and that silence, that space, right, can be a bit unnerving. A while back, usually when I go on a run, which I'm going to do right after I record this, I often listen to music, which, fires me up and I enjoy it. Or sometimes I'm out on a run or a walk, or I'll listen to a podcast. And I remember several months back, I got going for my run and I couldn't find my AirPods or something was going on. All of a sudden, I was just like, I'm just going to go without my phone, without anything to listen to. And it was weird at first. I felt kind of naked in a weird way. And then I was sort of embarrassed that I felt that way. But all of a sudden, it was like I was listening to my feet pounding on the pavement. I was listening to my heart beating and my breath coming in and out. And it was just this different, mindful experience of like, oh, wow, I was really present with running and breathing and the elements. And I just started seeing and feeling and sensing things that, quite frankly, not that there's, again, anything wrong with listening to music, or maybe you're listening to this podcast right now as you're on a run or a walk. Like that's part of what we do. But it's like filling the space all the time. How often do we open up our phones when, we're standing in line, when we're sitting on the train, when we're eating by ourselves? Not, again, makes sense, but what if we just allowed things to be still? Our physical space definitely impacts our mental and emotional space, right? When there's a lot of clutter in the space, it's hard to be calm. Not that we can't be, but right. And so again, it's just like things pile up. One of the things that my office got really cluttered prior to me doing some work to really, I had to clear out space to like get rid of some stuff and purge some files and move some things around because I just had like files and papers and things stacking up because there wasn't any space to put them. And I notice again, since I've done that, when I walk into my office, it's just a little bit calmer. I'm a little more present. I'm a little more grounded. It's a little bit easier to focus. If we think about our calendars, right? Look, and I know a lot of people put things on our calendars, and some of us have more autonomy with our calendars than others, or someone else is managing our calendar, or we got lots of different people to connect with. But in calendar space, it can be hard to block off time, but it's really about boundaries and priorities, which again can be difficult for us for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Not everything is urgent, not everything needs to happen right away. And so just saying no to things or moving things around or scheduling things out or rescheduling things so that we have some white space in our calendars to give us some time to breathe, to think if we can, right? In our relationships, right? Creating space, emotional space with others, holding space for people. Sometimes what people really need is just to be listened to. I work with a lot of really good, well-intentioned managers and leaders who constantly are coaching and trying to, support and empower their teams, and that's great. But sometimes what people need is just to be able to vent or be able to just bounce something off us or just be able to like check in. Even, our relationships are most important people in our lives. I've shared, I think, recently over the last several months, Michelle and I communicate a lot via voice text. I know a lot of people are communicating via voice text these days, but it's just, we've found that while we definitely very much enjoy, being together and connecting in real time, of course, we've been together for more than 25 years, sending each other voice texts that we can listen to on a walk or when we're, just sort of asynchronous communication has actually allowed us to create more space for each other and communicate about things in a different kind of way. And at first, I remember thinking, oh, that feels impersonal or weird, or why don't we just talk? But realizing again, we both have full schedules and full lives and we're kind of coming and going. But the voice text has actually been an interesting way for us to connect with each other. And I have a few other friends that I voice text with as well. And then when we do talk to each other live, either in person or on the phone or on Zoom or however we're communicating or connecting, thinking more about, and this is challenging for me as someone who talks a lot and has a lot of ideas and wants to share things and ask lots of questions. Can I just take a breath, take a pause, and actually create space? Because the space, whether it's in our relationships and our communication, whether it's in our calendars, whether it's in our physical space, whether we actually are able to move through our emotions and create more emotional space for ourselves, that's actually where we leave room for reflection, for new ideas, for innovation, for intuition, for creativity, for so many things that are essential for us to be not only successful and effective, but also come alive, right? I mean, think about trying to solve complex problems, trying to address new and different things. I mean, we're all living through this time of constant change and disruption and uncertainty. Like, we don't naturally have a lot of space built into our daily schedules for the most part, but we need to carve out space so that we can take care of ourselves, so that we can think creatively. I remember years ago speaking at a leadership conference for Genentech, and there was a speaker who spoke right before me, and he was a neuroscientist, and he said to this group of leaders, and again, this was like 15 years ago. So this was, I mean, the world seems very slow and quaint when I look back 15 years ago, but at the time it was as fast as it had ever been. And he said, how many of you spend time staring out the window? And people kind of laughed awkwardly, like, what do you mean? Like, who, what, I know that probably seems strange or unproductive. He said, but that's part of your job as leaders. Your job is to stare out the window and contemplate things and solve problems and think in a, how do you address complexity and how do you, create solutions and support people? And like that takes white space. And he was basically saying that the way that our brains and our nervous systems work, we can't really multitask. He's like, we're basically task switching. So the more things we're doing at once, the more distracted we are, the harder it is for us to go deeper and really think at a deep level. And I was sitting there as I was getting ready to speak myself and was paying attention, thought, wow, I don't stare out the window that often. I don't really take breaks or really, create that white space to allow myself to think. And fast forward to today from 15 years ago, the world moves at such an incredible pace and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. We've got to figure out how we actively create more space for ourselves in our physical environments, in our calendars, within ourselves, in our relationships. And, easier said than done. So, what are some things that we can do? What are some specific actions we can take to create more space? First thing we can do is just see if you can create like a small pocket of physical space. I mean, again, maybe you're someone who has a lot of clutter, maybe not. Maybe you have a lot of autonomy with your space, and whether it's your workspace, home space, shared space, but can you like just clear off one surface, one drawer, one area, one closet? My friend Susan likes to call these micro movements. If we sometimes, like I've been thinking about this with my storage unit. I think when I started looking at it a couple months ago, and I've had this storage unit for a long time, I think there were like 65 of those big plastic tubs, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I ever gonna? But I realized it's like one tub at a time. And now I think I've consolidated it down to where I think we're in the 40s with the tubs, and I've moved some stuff and gotten rid of some stuff and consolidated some things, but it's like, it's much more manageable. So can you do one small area just to kind of start and maybe create some momentum? The second thing you can do is see if you can block out short windows of unscheduled time in your calendar, even if it's like 30 or 60 minutes. Like block it off. No agenda, no catching up, just space. One of the things I remember learning when I first started writing books, which again, very different than clearing space, but like overwhelming, just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to organize my whole office or my whole house or my whole whatever, fill in the blank. But I found a couple of things that number one, just like one tub at a time, I could only write one paragraph at a time or one section at a time or one chapter at a time. So I just tried to focus on what I was actually working on. But a lot of times with writing, there's like writer's block and like, but I found if I would just block off the time in my calendar for writing an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, eventually I started going away to, Calistoga where I go write, which is in Napa, about an hour from where I live. And those writing retreats are really helpful. That's kind of how I write. I finally learned I'm sort of a binge writer. But in the early days when I would struggle, if I just scheduled an hour or two, oftentimes I wouldn't actually write. I would sit and squirm and I'd want to be, decluttering my, I call it productive procrastination. But I found that if I just stopped doing that and I forced myself to just sit and sit in the discomfort, not to be mean to myself, but it was like, oh, this is writing time. And what I learned was even though my fingers might not have been, hitting the keyboard and words may not have been coming out, which is what we think of with writing, I was thinking, I had created the space and the writing was actually happening. When I started going on these writing retreats, I would go sometimes 2 days, 3 days, and it was tough, especially when the girls were really young and I was traveling for speaking and it was hard on Michelle and it was a challenge. But sometimes I would go for like a day and a half and I'd literally write almost nothing. And then the last few hours before I was done with day two, I would just like bust out a bunch of words and I'd go, "Oh, I was writing the whole time." So again, that's different. You may not be a writer, you may not want to write a book or something like that, but it's like, can we block out that time, short blocks of unscheduled time, and just see what happens? A third thing we can do is practice pausing. Now, sometimes a pause can be long, like again, we take a day off or a week off, that's sort of its own pause, but it can even be in a conversation. Again, not always easy for me. Can we take a breath? Can we pause? Can we wait a beat or two? Sometimes in a meeting when I'm facilitating, when things get a little tense, it's like, okay, can we just take a breath and then see what comes next? Right? That unscheduled time, oftentimes, I find if we leave room, even in an agenda for a meeting, something will emerge. And as long as we have someone mindful of facilitating the discussion and keeping it productive and moving forward, it can be really, really an important thing for us to do. Something else that you can do is see if you can say no to one non-essential thing. Like, look at what's on your calendar, look at what's on your to-do list. Is there something you could say no to that would create more time, more energy, more space? Sometimes, like, that's really important to do, to just say no. It's a complete sentence. I know it can be hard to do. I know sometimes it can be scary, and there's consequences, so we want to be mindful. But pulling things off of our calendar, off of our to-do list, handing them off to someone else, asking if someone else could do it. Sometimes it's like just something that's really stressful for us and hard for us, maybe easy for someone else to do. But I think sometimes we reflexively say yes to things and then don't realize, wait a minute, I'm not setting myself up well. I've had days where I'll look at my calendar and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm back to back to back. Like this doesn't work. And sometimes I'll have to negotiate with Jessica on my team or with, people that I've made commitments to, like, hey, I'm going to have to move this to, because like we got to take care of ourselves, right? Another thing we can do is just check in with ourselves. What if you just asked yourself right here in this moment, what do I need space for right now? Where could I use more space? What could I release? What could I let go of? And I understand the real world that we live in. And sometimes we may be in a phase of life or a stretch or a day or a week or a month or a quarter or a period where it's like really hard to do. Again, I remember, I mean, in days of my life when, I mean, things are full for me right now, but it's like I can think of times when we had a baby and a toddler, or I was traveling here, or, on a book deadline, or, different things going on. I get it. But asking ourselves what we really could use more space for, or what could we release or let go of, that can create more space. Maybe we make some requests, maybe we say no to some things. And then finally, we can offer space to someone else. Just listen without interrupting, which if Michelle listens to this, she's going to laugh out loud hearing that come from me. But see if you can try not to interrupt or fix or advise or coach or give feedback. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but see if you can just be present and hold space. I mean, sometimes a great question to ask someone if they come to you with an issue, and particularly if you're a problem solver, you're a manager, you're someone who tends to coach people, give advice, that's beautiful. But you can often ask, what does support look like right now? How can I best support you in this conversation? Do you want me to just listen? Would you like my advice? Would you like some feedback from, I mean, just ask and see what they say, but see if your default setting can be first to like, let me just hold space for this other human being and let them know, I see you, I hear you, what you're saying matters to me. And then from there, maybe we respond, but we don't always have to jump in and fix it and, solve the problem for them. So that's some things that we can do to create more physical space, to create more space in our calendar, to maybe even create a little more mental, emotional space for ourselves, and to create space in our relationships with others. It's simple on the one hand, it's just not always that easy to do because there's so much going on. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Feel free to check out the show notes if you want to learn more about me or my work or connect with me on social media. The best place to find out about me is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work. And remember, we're all in this thing together.